it's not to be missed. The Eleusinian mysteries have been demystified. The sacrifices, some of them human, that were made to those gods are regrettable but have been blotted out and forgotten. And Athenian imperialism is also a thing of the past. What remains is the fantastic beauty and the faith that built it. The question is how to keep what is of value of this sort in art and in our own emotions and in our finer feelings, the numinous, the transcendent, I'll go as far as the ecstatic, and to distinguish it precisely from superstition and the supernatural, which are designed to make us fearful and afraid and servile, and which sometimes succeed only too well. Thank you.
Well, it's now time for the final act in our debate, closing statements. We'll do that in the reverse order of our opening remarks. So, Christopher, I'm going to call on you again to speak. Your closing remarks, please.
I'm not ready.
Okay.
I didn't know it was coming. And, Tony, what do you say? Would you rather have another question? There's so many people who've got them.
I'm happy.
I'd rather answer another question.
Let's take another question. Okay.
In other words, don't run away with the idea I'd run out of stuff, okay? Yes, I'd rather be provoked. Someone could do that.
Sure. Well, let's do that. And I guess we'll give Christopher a pause here, a chance to drink and catch his breath. And Tony, go to you on this, the whole question of, which has been at the center of this debate, on the rigidity or flexibility of religious doctrine. Your church, the Catholic Church, has just made a reversal of sorts on its policy around the use of condoms, allowed explicitly and only for the prevention of HIV/AIDS infection. Is that a positive? Is that an expression of flexibility or a critique of the decades of rigidity before this reversal?
Well, I welcome it. But you know, I mean, I'm one of the, I think, billion lay Catholics. So I don't, and I think many Catholics have different views on a whole range of issues upon which there is teaching by the Church. I just wanted to pick up something, if I might, that Christopher said, because I thought his discussion of the transcendent was very interesting, actually. I mean, for those of us of religious faith, we acknowledge and believe that there is a power higher and separate from human power. And in a way what Christopher is saying is, well, I can't accept that, but I do accept there is something transcendent in the human experience, and something numinous, something even ecstatic. You see, for me, the belief in a higher power and the fact that we should be obedient to the will of that power, not simply our own will, I don't regard that as putting me in a position of civility, is not the word I would use. I would use the word obligation. And, you know, it is of course absolutely true that when I can point to any of the acts that I say are inspired by religious faith, you can say, well, they could easily have been inspired by humanism. But I think that for those of us that are of faith and do believe that there is something actually more than simply the human power, this does give you, I think, a humility. It's not all that can give you a humility, but it does. I think, and I have witnessed this myself, I remember, actually again to refer to Northern Ireland, when I met some of the people who were the relatives of those who died in the Omagh bombing, which came actually after the Good Friday Agreement and was the worst terrorist attack in the history of Northern Ireland. And I went to visit the relatives of the victims, and I remember a man saying to me, who had lost his loved one in the bombing, saying to me, you know, I have prayed about this, and I want you to know that this terrible act should make you all the more determined to reach peace and to not stop your quest for peace. And it is completely true that, of course, he could have come to such an extraordinary, and I would say transcendent view of forgiveness and compassion without religious faith. But it was what led him to that. And so I think you can't ignore the fact that for many of us, actually religious faith is what shapes us in this direction, and not because we are servile or base our religious faith on superstition or contrary to reason, indeed, which is why I've never seen a contradiction between Darwin and being someone of religious faith. But we do genuinely believe that it impels us in a way that is different and more imperative, in a sense, than anything else in our lives. And, you know, in a way we wouldn't be being true to ourselves unless we admitted that. So that doesn't mean to say that someone who is of no religious faith couldn't be just as good a person, and that is, I do not claim for an instant that anybody who is of religious faith is in some way a superior or better person than someone who isn't. But I do say that religion can and does, in the lives of millions, actually hundreds of millions, in fact billions of people, does give them an impulse to be better people than otherwise they would be.
I would ask for your closing statement. 5 minutes for your closing statement. Yep. So now on to our closing statements. Christopher, you will begin. Okay. You have 5 minutes on the clock.
I think a way I might do it, actually, is by commenting on what Tony just said, because he succeeded in doing what I had hoped I might get him to do earlier, which is to allow me to drive him back onto the territory of metaphysics, with which I began, because we did need to transcend that, and thus to get beyond questions like, well, are religious people good, are they bad, and other things that are very important. Does religion make them behave better or worse, and so forth. I'll give you, and I'll challenge Tony on an example. I mentioned earlier our attachment to the labour and socialist movement in our lifetimes. For a very long time, we had in that movement a challenger, apparently from the left, the communist movement, which has only been dead a very short time now. It actually hasn't died everywhere yet. And which said it had a much more comprehensive and courageous and thoroughgoing answer than we did to the problems created by capitalism and imperialism and other things, and really proposed a fighting solution. And if I was to point to you the number of heroic people who believed in that, and the number of wonderful works especially of fiction, novels and essays written by people who believed in it, you could probably all of you mention one of your own. If you were a Canadian, I hope they still teach about him in school, the great example of Norman Bethune, heroic doctor who went to volunteer in China during the Civil War on the communist side, did amazing work, invented a form of battlefield blood transfusion. Just one among many examples. It was the communists in many parts of Europe who barred the road to fascism in Spain, and kept Madrid for many years from falling to Franco and Hitler and Mussolini. Gandhi may take credit for the Indian independence movement, too much in my view, but no one would deny the tremendous role played by the Indian communists in doing this, in helping to break the challenge, break the hold of Great Britain on their country. As a matter of fact, some people find it embarrassing to concede this, but I don't, as a supporter of it myself. The African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's party, at least half of its members of the Central Committee and the Executive were members of the Communist Party until quite recently, very probably including Mandela himself. There's no doubt about it. There was real heroism and dignity and humanism to those people, but we opposed it. We said, no, it won't work. Why won't it work? It's not worth the sacrifice of freedom that it implies. It implies that all these great things can only be done if you'll place yourself under an infallible leadership. one that once it's made a decision has made that decision and you are bound by it. You might conceivably notice where I'm going here. It's why many of the people, the brilliant intellectuals who did leave it, left it very often for as high reasons of principle as they joined it in the first place. And the names of their books are legion and legendary. The best known is called The God That Failed, precisely because it was an attempt at a bogus form, a surrogate of religion. But let no one say, and when the history comes to be written, no one will be able to say that it didn't represent some high points in human history. But I repeat, it wasn't worth it at the sacrifice of mental and intellectual and moral freedom. And that was the purpose of my original set of questions on the metaphysical side. Are you, consider yourselves, and consider this carefully, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, comrades, friends, are you yourselves willing, for the sake of certain elements of the numinous, perhaps for a great record of good works, as it's proposed by Tony, are you willing to say that you give your allegiance to an ultimate Redeemer? Because you're not really religious if you don't believe that there is a divine supervision involved. You don't have to believe it intervenes all the time. If you don't believe that, you're already halfway out the door. You don't need me. But are you willing to pay the price of a permanent supervisor? Are you willing to pay the price of believing in things that are supernatural? Miracles, afterlives, angels. Are you willing to admit, perhaps this most of all, are you willing to admit that human beings can be the interpreter of this divine figure? Because a religion means that you will have to follow someone who is your religious leader. You can't, try as you may, follow Jesus of Nazareth. It can't be done. You can try and do it, it can't be done. You'll have to follow his vicar on earth, Pope Benedict XXVI, as presently, his own claim, not mine. The apostolic succession, the vicar of Christ on earth. You have to say, this person has divine authority. I maintain that that and what goes with it is too much of a sacrifice of the mental and intellectual freedom that is essential to us to be tolerated. And you gain everything by repudiating that and standing up to your own full height. And you gain much more than you will by pretending that you're a member of a flock or in any other way any kind of sheep. Thank you.
I was just, when Christopher was talking there about the Times and the Labour Party together, I was just recalling after we suffered our fourth election defeat in a row in the Labour Party, meeting a party member after the fourth defeat who said to me, "The people have now voted against us 4 times. What is wrong with them?" And you know, I would say that actually the example of communism shows that those that want to suppress freedom, those who have a fanatical view of the way the world should work, those are not confined to the sphere of religious faith, I'm afraid. It is there in many, many different walks of life. So the question is, for me, this is not about how I, with a belief for me as a Christian, with a belief in Jesus Christ,